The WikiLeaks founder, Julian Assange, he has left a British prison and has flown out of the country. And his organization announced this development not long after court documents showed he's due to plead guilty tomorrow to violating U.S. espionage laws. Footage released showed Mr. Assange heading to the airport and then boarding a flight to Saipan in the Northern Marianas. And there he will attend a court hearing where he's expected to be sentenced to 62 months of jail time already served. He will then be allowed to return to his home country, Australia. Reacting to the news, the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said that the US case against Assange had dragged on for too long, adding that there's nothing to be gained by his continued imprisonment. For more on this, let's speak with Donald Rothwell, who is Professor of International Law at the Australian National University. He joins us from Canberra. Professor, I'm going to quote the Prime Minister, "Nothing more to gain in holding Assange," says Mr. Albanese. So why has the US decided it's now okay with a plea deal after pursuing him for so long, over 14 years?
We know that the United States has had Assange's case under active consideration. President Biden made a brief comment to reporters in the White House a few weeks ago, indicating that the Assange case was under review. We also know that Australia has increased its diplomatic and political leverage against the United States in relation to this matter, seeking to bring about a resolution of the case. And we also know, of course, that the United States is currently in an election cycle, which could see all sorts of additional dynamics come into play towards the end of 2024. So all of this would seem to suggest that certainly the Biden administration wanted to bring this matter to a close, and the Australian government, through its suggestions, negotiations, and pleas to the United States, has brought about some success on behalf of Julian Assange.
How do you see this deal going to play out in the United States? You mentioned briefly there that this is an election year, but once the news really goes out, what are people going to be reacting to?
Well, of course, Assange has become something of a cause célèbre globally, but also within the United States in terms of his claimed position as a publisher, releasing national security classified documentation on WikiLeaks, and whether or not he would or would not be able to enjoy US constitutional rights and entitlements in that respect. It also needs to be observed that Assange, just like Donald Trump, was subject to charges under the Espionage Act. So there's a political dimension to this, but there's also a significant media dimension to the way in which the Assange case is played out.
So, Professor, is this case then permanently closed in your view? Because the US had long argued Assange published information that endangered lives. Assuming something does come up in the future, can the DOJ then reopen this case?
Well, I don't know whether they can reopen this case if a plea deal has been reached with respect to what were originally 17 charges brought against Assange under the Espionage Act. I think much will depend upon if Assange seeks to resume his role as the editor and the leader of WikiLeaks. We, of course, know that there are many ongoing conflicts around the world at the moment in which the United States and other nations are engaged, and whether or not they might be matters that might come to WikiLeaks' attention, and whether or not Julian Assange might seek to resume some of those activities which brought him to the attention of the United States in the first place.
Let's look ahead at the next steps, Professor. This plea deal must still be approved by a federal judge. How long will this take? And what is then the main hurdle standing in the way of an approval, if any?
Well, if one looks at the court documents which have been filed with the US court in Saipan, really, to a degree, the judge is being presented with a fait accompli. It's made fairly clear that both the United States government and also the Assange legal team have reached agreement on this matter. This case is really going to be expedited tomorrow in terms of not only Assange entering a plea deal to one guilty charge, but also there will be a sentencing process associated with that. There's a lot of speculation in Australia that the sentencing process will really just completely mirror the 42 months that Assange has been on remand in the United Kingdom. And if that is the case, well, then Assange could be on his way back to Australia within 24 to 48 hours.
And about the US intelligence agencies, how would they be assessing this result, or at least how this has developed, how this case has panned out? Because some believe that Assange was a scapegoat to be used as an example.
Well, it's certainly been the case that we know that the US intelligence agencies, going back to the Obama administration, have been very concerned about the conduct of WikiLeaks, going back to 2010, that there's been this continuous, perhaps even relentless pursuit by the US Department of Justice with respect to Assange and WikiLeaks. Of course, there was always going to be this difficulty that Assange was operating outside of the United States. So there was always going to be a need for him to be extradited to be brought before a US court. So that was always going to be a significant legal hurdle. And that may well ultimately have been one of the grounds upon which the United States has been prepared to make certain concessions to bring this matter to a close.
Appreciate your analysis and your time. Donald Rothwell, Professor of International Law at the Australian National University. Thank you for joining us.